Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Throne of Steel episode number 160 based on novel. So let's start. For the sake of reaching the 9th step as early as possible to take Fulo as my wife, as well as to bring an even greater honor and glory to the Empire, I took this training trip. But never did I expect that because of the great gains in this trip, the incoming period of my life would become a total nightmare. At this point, Elux's face became gradually more and more sinister, filled with anger. Alongside his fury, his intense soul fluctuations caused repeated shakes of the Tower of Eternity. After leaving the Empire, I roamed through the whole continent. With my cultivation reaching the 8th step, I encountered almost no challenges. During 2 whole years, I wandered through almost all cities of the 3 great empires, discovering all the local conditions and customs and experiencing the joys and the sorrows of the world. The scope of my world and my cultivation all made considerable progress. And, maybe because I was the one chosen by the Goddess of Light, I had a lot of happy encounters in these 2 years, and acquired a martial technique of incredible might. When I returned to the Empire, my cultivation had already reached the peak of the 8th step. Upon seeing Fulo again, I couldn't help but take her in my arms while sobbing from extreme joy. I could feel that I was nearing the edge of the 9th step, only at 1 step from breaking through, and believed that I would be able to marry my most beloved Fulo in the near future, as well as to inevitably become the future greatest powerhouse of the Empire. At that time, I had almost no notion of schemes, and told Fulo about all my various adventures during these 2 years of training, to share the feelings I had during these moving encounters with her. However, something slightly displeasing happened to me later. The son of the Supreme Pontiff unexpectedly joined the Imperial Magic Academy to study. At that time, I found it very strange why he would come there. Compared to our Pombo Empire, the glorious church should have reached even deeper levels of magic researches, so he had no need at all to come here to pursue his studies. However, I didn't give it much thought because of my joy from being on the verge of marrying Fulo. After I told Fulo everything about my trip, she held a great interest toward that martial technique I gained in my encounters, hoping that I could hand it over for her to learn, but I rejected her. That martial technique was certainly miraculous, but it could by no means be learned or used, because it came at a too great cost, and I feared she would get wounded in the process. Do you know what kind of martial technique that was? Even now, I still find it to be really miraculous. Although it was just a move, it required a perfect harmonization with the owner's soul to be executed. It seemed to come from an ancient tribe from another world. A type of martial soul technique, this technique had a very strange name. It was called tortoiseshell technique. When I had just obtained it, I still took it to be just a defensive martial art, but after deep researches, I found out that it had almost no relations with defense, but was an ability of prediction. Back then, the glorious church was the only other entity in the whole continent to have a prophet. I also have some understanding of it. All they can predict is the future. As for that martial technique, its use would execute a kind of divination, with a really overbearing aspect, its unconditionality. Launching the tortoiseshell technique would act on all living creatures in its scope, the user being no exception. And even if a god is in the area of effect, he will have no immunity either, being just as affected by its absolute control. It's such a fearful technique. But at the same time, as it has absolute effects, it brings certain danger. This technique has a great indeterminacy. After using it, the user will have no control over its effects. In other words, the effects may be positive just as they may be negative. But no matter what, the user will have to bear some burden, so using it could very possibly offer the user as a sacrifice for the tortoiseshell technique after a few uses if they are unlucky. How could I be willing to learn such a martial technique? Or even give it to Fulo? At this point, Elux had an extremely bitter look, but Fulo didn't understand my painstaking effort. She thought I wanted to keep it for myself, and thus refused to transmit it to another. Its absolute effects and efficiency against even a god was just too alluring, making her completely unable to treat it lightly. Why didn't she consider that if I really wanted to keep it for myself, then I'd simply not tell her about it? At first, I was thinking that she was just temporarily letting her emotions affect her decisions and didn't think about it too much. It would likely calm down after 2 days. As expected, when I went to look for her 2 days later, she seemed to have entirely recovered, only looking as though she still had some worries. But her attitude to me was the same as before, and the matter of that day was not mentioned again. Never did I expect her to be such a snake-hearted girl, who had already executed her schemes against me. Elux gritted his teeth as his whole body shook, clearly because the experience he had at that time was simply far too painful. Then on a bright day with good weather, with the blue sky stretching continuously over the horizon, and the sunshine was especially abundant. The intense light essence brought an indescribable sense of harmony to me as the sign of light. This sunshine was really ideal. Fulo had invited me to go for an outing, to which I naturally agreed gladly, and even told her that I would seclude myself to aim for the 9th step after that excursion, to ask His Majesty for her hand after I succeed in accomplishing this breakthrough. At that time, I believed His Majesty would at least offer me the level of nobility of a Viscount, as well as a title of court mage. We exited the Empire, to head for the outskirts, and right when we were out for a scenic tour, I suddenly discovered that we were surrounded, a large amount of black-clad men sealing off every one of our routes of escape. These people were masked head to toe, making not even the slightest shred of their skins visible. Upon appearance, they launched a frantic attack at us. At that time, Fulo was in a daze, seemingly having even forgotten about the use of magic despite her cultivation reaching the 8th step. As a man, protecting my own woman seemed like common sense in my eyes, especially with how conceited I was at that time. Relying on my cultivation reaching the peak of the 8th step, I made use of the various magics I had researched painstakingly. Those black-clad men were extremely strong, but a lot of them were killed at my hands. However, they were only growing more and more numerous, each of them reaching at least the 7th step. I found it very strange at that time. If this many powerhouses from the other 2 great empires were really infiltrated, how could the powerhouses from our empire disregard them to such an extent? If this kept up, I was afraid Fulo and I wouldn't ever get away, so I made the prompt decision of bringing out Fulo to immediately break out from the siege. At this time, Fulo seemed to have recovered her senses, immediately using various summoning spells to assist me, and we rode her summoned beast to flee back to the Empire. As we thought the enemies would already no longer catch up to us, we rushed out at full speed, and the distant walls of the Empire even came into sight. But suddenly, a slight chill permeated in my heart, and when I lowered my head, I found a pitch-black dagger piercing deeply through my chest, its handle being held in Fulo's hand. At this point, Long Houchen and Kia couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Never did they expect this Princess Fulo to actually betray Elux. They were lovers who had sworn the pledge of eternal love. At that instant, her look was completely filled with malevolence. Deep tears of sadness flowed out from Elux's eyes. She even murmured, "Why, just why didn't you hand the tortoiseshell over to me? Why? I hadn't planned to go so far at first." My heart was in pain, even more in pain than my wound. My cold chest gradually got numbed, and I could feel my vital force gush out through that dagger. Even at that time, I was still unable to believe that my beloved Fulo was the culprit of that act against me. I just loved her that much. For the sake of marrying her, I trained night and day. All for the sake of sharing happiness alongside her in the future. But she stabbed a dagger full of poison in my left chest, aimed at the spot which should correspond with an ordinary person's heart. This stab inflicted complete despair in me. She should have been clearly aware that I had no suspicions at all toward her, and moreover, her stab was timed the instant my vigilance was the most loose. This instant, even more black-clad men came from in front of us. They seemed to have been lying in wait since long ago, and expected all of this to happen long since. The previous ambush was just a start, but Fulo's stab was the true critical point in the move against me. A familiar-sounding cold voice spread. That man told Fulo, "Kill him." That instant, I finally came to a realization. The desire for survival caused me to push Fulo away, jumping off from her mount. That instant, Fulo seemed quite in a daze, seemingly having had a change of heart due to this stab, which stopped her from immediately finishing me off. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I took out a scroll, which was forged by a great master for me, and used that escape scroll, teleporting me instantly 6 kilometers away. They clearly didn't expect me to have such a thing in store, which is how I managed to get away. The instant the escape scroll took effect, I still remember clearly that the sobered Fulo hastily commanded her summoned beast to attack me. That instant, her eyes were only filled with cold killing intent, without any of the former tender sentiments. Long Houchen and Kia were already completely immersed in Elux's story, to the extent of forgetting the whole situation they were in. Perceiving the deep sadness coming out from Elux, they were totally able to imagine the kind of feelings he had back at that time. For a moment, the two of them were completely speechless. So there was after all a basis for the Sign of Light's betrayals to his duties. He was in the end betrayed, but how could that mere fact cause him to become the slumbering calamity? The sadness in Elux's eyes gradually turned into coldness. You are feeling that the mere betrayal of Fulo shouldn't be enough for me to betray my holy convictions. You misunderstand. This alone would still be insufficient to cause these changes in me. But Longhauchen, as a scion of light, you should understand that the scion of light is the one chosen by the goddess of light, and the resolve he has as such. However, the one to betray me was not Princess Fulo alone, but this whole world. Through the escape scroll, I broke away from their ambush, and only felt a great chilliness fill me at that time. The beautiful parts of my heart disappeared with Fulo's betrayal, but even so, I couldn't bring myself to hate her at that time. I loved her deeply, and wanted to think of her good parts no matter what. That black-clad man's final appearance caused me to guess that maybe Fulo was coerced into doing that and was completely unwilling. Although I was clearly aware that, as the princess, it was almost impossible that there could be anyone who could coerce her, I still wanted to keep this way of thinking. At that time, I was just really too foolish. Fulo's stab was aimed right at my left chest, but she didn't know that unlike an ordinary person, my heart was located on the right side. Although her poisonous dagger caused heavy wounds in me, these wounds were not mortal. I resisted the pain with great difficulty, finding a hollow tree to treat my wound. Relying on medicine I had gotten in my adventures, I forced out the poison from my body before gradually eliminating all this poison by the means of my pure light essence. This process was painful and long, but I knew very clearly that even if I wanted Fulo to clarify all this, I had to first wait for my body to recover entirely for that. I heard a lot of brouhaha outside the hollow tree in the process, as if large armies were transferred around. But at that time, I did not expect the reasons for these armies to be deployed. It took 2 entire months for my injuries to get better and my cultivation to recover. I stealthily exited the hollow tree to return back to the Empire. But before arriving at the city gates, a thunderous scene came to my sight. A very clear announcement from the royal family was displayed right nearby the city gate, in which was written, "The Duke of the Empire, Elux, who attacked the Princess Fulo to steal a powerful martial technique, snatching it and causing her to sustain heavy injuries, is wanted for the crime of treason. Their whole family is to be deprived of their territory, and get death penalties. Every commoner reporting traces of the criminal will get rewarded with 10,000 gold coins. I absolutely didn't expect them to use such despicable means, actually making such bogus accusations. Furthermore, this announcement from the royal family was not the only thing. There was also an announcement from the glorious church with the same contents, designating me as a heretic corrupted by darkness. At that time, I took a whole half hour to gradually come back to my senses. I loved Fulo deeply, but I wasn't a total idiot. If I hadn't realized this huge plot aimed against me at that time, I wouldn't be fit to be the inheritor of the identity of Scion of Light. I immediately went into concealment to disguise myself, thinking at that time that I had to find a proof that they were deceiving His Majesty and the Church, to prove my innocence. The key element to this proof lay in Fulo, which is why I went to look for her to make it clear. Perhaps it was because several years had passed, or perhaps because I was thought to have died from the poison, the Empire did not put emergency measures in place. So after I disguised myself, returning to the Empire's capital was very easy. Looking at these formerly familiar places, my heart was in great pain. At night, I stealthily infiltrated into the royal palace, still extremely familiar with that place. Although I was a mage, having a cultivation reaching the 8th step, I had numerous means for infiltrating my destination. Coming into Fulo's quarters, I saw another man there. The son of the Supreme Pontiff, Palo. They were discussing, and that was in Fulo's bedroom. At that time, I already had guesses about the relationship between them, but was still unwilling to believe it. But when I clearly heard the contents of their discussion, I finally realized how stupid I was, and the extent of that plot. Back then, Fulo questioned Palo on why they hadn't found me, and he replied that he had already mobilized the glorious church's force, matching with the Empire's forces to find traces of me, dead or alive. That martial technique in my hands had to be seized at any cost. I gradually constructed it all from the clues I heard in the midst of their conversation. It turned out that as early as when I was out for a few years, Palo had already made a trip to the Imperial Academy, having 2 purposes in mind. One was to discuss the matter of pulling me into the glorious church with the Emperor, and the second, to chase after Fulo. At first, His Majesty had no interest in enticing me to join the glorious church. But Palo insisted, using countless means to seduce Fulo. Though, Fulo being so materialistic, due to his flowery speed and the appeal of the numerous martial techniques and pills at the disposal of the glorious church, she finally gave in to his continuous offenses. Pero mentioned to her that the Scion of Light would be a threat to the glorious church, hence the church needed absolutely to get rid of me, to make sure of their eternal rule at the time he would become the Pope and Fulo would be his empress. Originally, Fulo still had some apprehensions, but Palo expressed to His Highness the will of the glorious church to support their empire in vanquishing the other empires and in uniting the continent. Moreover, he promised Fulo to give her all the martial techniques from me for her to learn. Both the royal family and Fulo were finally ensnared by the benefits that way, while I became the sacrifice for all these benefits to be obtained. This was supposed to be a perfect plan. By taking advantage of the trip I took with Fulo to ambush me, they wanted to deplete my strength, and then on the way back, Fulo would take advantage of my lowered guard and exhaustion to move against me, making it hardly possible for me to escape. At that time, they would only need to kill me and report me as a betrayer to the empire and the church, so that even despite my reputation as the pride of the empire, the truth behind this conspiracy would rapidly be drowned. I hated them bitterly. I never expected my homeland, my lover, and my convictions to actually betray me together. At that time, my brain went blank, and as Fulo and Pero were in the midst of making out, I suddenly rushed in and launched fatal attacks against them. My appearance was just too sudden for them. Although they were top figures of the younger generation, there was a significant gap in our strengths, and this was moreover a situation of ambush. I very rapidly took the advantage, wounding Palo seriously while suppressing Fulo with my attacks. Although a large amount of powerhouses from the palace immediately gathered as a result, they did not dare act rashly as I held Fulo and Palo as hostages at that time. Then I questioned Fulo, why did you have to do this to me? What in me dissatisfied you? She only kept begging me for her survival then, but I had already heard all their previous conversation. How could I still trust in her words after that? At that time, my only thought was take them down with myself. The former me was incredibly proud. At that time, I had been reduced to the position of traitor to the nation, completely unable to accept such a huge downfall. Having no more attachment to my own life, I only wanted to take down this cheating couple with me. But that was, after all, the son of the Pope, having many survival means at his disposal. Right when I was prepared to take them down with myself, he used extraordinary means to summon the Pope's attack, causing me to get seriously wounded. And, in the end, as I couldn't bear to move against Fulo, I could only choose to escape the encirclement. After I finally made it out, I went into hiding in the capital, covered in bruises after a narrow escape. Immediately, the Empire initiated a manhunt in the whole city, looking for traces of me. It was through the help of a beggar that I formerly saved that I luckily escaped their chase. But as I was just done healing my wounds came thunderous news. They had caught my family. Elux gritted his teeth and declared they knew that I was concealed in the Empire, which is why they released an announcement about executing the traitor's family. I still remember that day clearly. The sky seemed to get blood-red colored as His Highness passed down the execution order in front of the masses. When I saw Palo and Fulo clad in armor and cutting off my relatives' heads, I lost the last ounces of hope and light in me, which all faded away. Can you imagine? Someone who witnessed all his kin getting killed. My father, mother, older sister, younger sister, and the rest of my family, even the young children were not spared. My whole family was executed with no exception. I knew that they were waiting for me to show up at that time. Waiting for me with a perfect bait. They just understood my character far too well. But at that time, a black tile I had formerly gained in the previous training trip got affected by my dark emotions, turning my whole body cold and unable to move a single step. It was because of this that I had to stare blankly at the scene of my family getting slaughtered one by one. At that time, I was furious, having entered a frantic state. My kin's blood dyed the ground of the public square of the Empire's capital. Not a single one of my 367 family members escaped this fate. They all met with violent deaths under their butcher's knives. At the time I recovered from that cold state, the rest of my family was already extinguished. I seemed to catch sight of their specters, pacing back and forth irresolutely in the sky, utterly unreconciled. I didn't step in as my family was already all dead, and I left the place with an overwhelming answer. As I did not appear from beginning to end in this slaughter, they believed that I already had left the Pombo Empire, hence the hunt came to a provisional end. Instead, they went on to search for my traces over the whole continent. After finally exiting the Empire, I rushed out in a set direction, running frantically for 7 days and 7 nights until getting completely washed out, finding myself in a valley. From that day onwards, there had not been any more light in my heart, only an endless rancor and grudge. This hatred was what kept me alive. I had to kill all those who had betrayed me and slaughtered my people. For some reason, at the time I lost all light, the tortoiseshell technique had ineffably disappeared, perhaps because it was disgusted with the hatred I had. But this didn't matter in my eyes. That black tile I had was the inheritance of an ancient necromancer. Light and necromancy should be two totally opposite powers, but thanks to my innate gifts, I gradually fused them as one. I needed power, I needed to topple the whole Pombo Empire and destroy all the glorious church's forces. I had no more relatives, everyone else in this world were my enemies. Only their blood and lives could offset the rancour in my heart. I trained day and night, increasing my strength massively, all for the sake of taking revenge one day. Revenge became my greatest driving force. A sign of light hidden in deep mountains to train at 100%. Can you imagine how frightening that is? At the time I left these deep mountains, I was not the sign of light Elux anymore, but the holy necromancer, slumbering calamity Elux. I killed people at sight, turning all living beings into undead under my command. Starting from a small town, I gradually gathered my army of undeads. When I was back at the Pombo Empire, I already had 1 million undead by my sides. I thoroughly destroyed the Pombo Empire, and when that slut Fulo followed Pombo back to the glorious church, I finally brought my undead army to destroy the church. I wanted to annihilate them thoroughly for the sake of avenging my family. Hearing all he said, Long Houchen couldn't help but burst out in rage. Haven't you thought about these countless innocents you took with such a revenge? Your targets of revenge were the royal family of Pombo Empire and the church. So why did you have to implicate so many people? He sympathized with Elux's encounters, but was utterly disgusted with his ruthless methods and his treatment of other humans. Elux revealed an indifferent expression of sadness. When I hesitated in the past, I came to regret it afterwards. But at that time, the three empires and the church were just too powerful, so a single person's strength couldn't possibly succeed in exacting revenge. For the sake of revenge, I walked through my downfall and headed for darkness. But at that time, I never even considered that I could be in the wrong. Slaughter was all that mattered in my eyes. Long Houchen did not utter a word, because he could feel a deep sadness and remorse from Elux. He regrets it? Could it be that the former holy necromancer who caused tremendous damage to humankind, Elux, is regretting his acts? Could it be because of Caira and me? Even if Elux had a remorseful heart, Long Houchen's impression of him wouldn't change like that. The sin being already committed, could remorse even undo it? Just how many humans' blood had stained on his hands? After I destroyed my own homeland, the glorious church chose to unite hands with the other two empires to handle me, initiating a war. At that time, I had already taken over close to 1/3 of the whole continent, and had a large amount of undead powerhouses under my hands, their soul fire being under my control, making them incomparably loyal. An army of 1 billion undeads was under my command, throwing themselves at the glorious church like a plague. Although the glorious church had powerful divine magic, as a holy necromancer, the undead under my control had an extreme resistance toward light. At the start of the war, I had a total advantage. But undead were after all merely undead. Even if they were even more loyal, they had lost that intelligence belonging to humans. The hearts the people united gradually in this glorious era, and once they steadied their troops, the counter-offense was launched under the lead of the glorious church. At that time, I was already exceedingly powerful, able to resist even the attacks from the Pope of the glorious church. But I couldn't be certain that my undead army would win on its own. In an ultimate decisive battle, my undead army was defeated, and although it came also at a bitter cost for the human armies, I was in the end defeated. Heavily wounded by the group of experts led by the glorious church's Pope, I had a malicious weakening curse inflicted by that Pope. For the next millennia, I was in great pain due to that sacred curse, coming to an eternal slumber. This war ended with my defeat, but my revenge was still a success. Although I suffered unredeemable heavy wounds, those ones who harmed my kin were all killed, including me and Fulo. I still remember clearly that the instant I broke Fulo's heart in pieces, her eyes were filled with pain and struggle. I had taken out her heart to see whether it was still colored red. Pero was turned into an undead by the most painful means. Keeping him by my side, I slowly boiled his soul fire over the course of 1,000 years, finally annihilating it completely and eternally stopping him from reincarnating. Back then, this Tower of Eternity was created to nurture my physical body. But unfortunately, I finally didn't manage to surmount that hateful curse. Otherwise, given my cultivation of that time, I wouldn't die even after living 1,000, no, 10,000 years. But in reality, what caused my eternal slumber was not the wounds on my body, but in my heart. After I had killed all my foes, I found out that there was nothing left to keep me attached to this world. My loved ones were dead, my hated ones as well. My heart became empty, with no more care for living, so I finally chose to let myself die out. Then I put myself into deep slumber here, because I was unwilling to recall about the war of that time, and to ponder about whether I was in the right or in the wrong. Now it looks that I was in the wrong. I was really in the wrong. No matter whether I had slaughtered them or not, my kin still wouldn't be brought back. Moreover, I have taken so many innocent lives. My guilt is already beyond redemption. I am the worst human sinner. Reaching this point, Elux's sad look carried a sincere disappointment and frustration when looking at Long Houchen and Kia. I need to thank the two of you for waking me up and for freeing me of my former answer. I don't know for how long I have been asleep, but after all of it passed and I finally calmed down for real, I can see the evil crimes I have committed. As you said, my power is not fitting for you two to inherit. This inheritance belonging to necromancy should rather disappear forever, to avoid the possibility of another such disaster. I originally believed that all the humans in this world were despicable and shameless creatures, all beyond redemption. But seeing the feelings between the two of you, I realized that I was in the wrong. Of the two of you, one was all willing to renounce her own life for the sake of the other one, paying with no hesitation the cost of her own heart. And the other one chose to rather give up on his holy convictions as the sign of light for his beloved one. You two have finally shown me what true devotion is, what a true couple united until death parts them is. Thank you. Upon finally witnessing the feelings between you two, I have finally understood that love really exists in this world, that not all humans are despicable creatures. So it really was a heartless urge I had to slaughter everything in my way. There is already no more meaning in regretting since long ago, but, after telling all this to you, I feel much more comfortable. The evil tendencies that filled my heart are also getting purified, and although I won't ever possibly return to the embrace of light, at least this evil body can make a contribution with its holy origins. Saying that, Elux pointed his right hand at the coffin in front of them. The previously spilling death energy immediately gushed out. His left hand made a gesture at Long Houchen and Kia, and their bodies immediately got surrounded in a golden barrier, therefore rendering them unaffected by any of the death energy. One could clearly see that the death energy pulsing violently was all turned white, and although Long Houchen and Kia only had the time to sense a glimpse of that previous gush of death energy, they perceived an astonishing purity in that death energy. A death energy of such purity was already beyond the scope of a holy necromancer's level. That was all the accumulation Elux did throughout several thousand years. Such terrifying might could be called the totality of Elux's attainments in life beyond holy light. A white stream of air gathered as Elux slowly lifted his hand, causing strips of white light to revolve around his right arm. As his fingertips turned more and more glistening, that dazzling luster turned all the seventh floor of the Tower of Eternity completely white. Elux declared impassively, Kia, you have gone through a great torment, and when you finally walked past the final path, I had already decided to take you as my inheritor. You have certainly purified my heart and soul, making me realize how filthy this inheritance of mine is, thus I want to offer you something unrelated to holy necromancy. In my several past years of slumber, I had condensed the purest kind of death energy. As you have the body of samsara, you innately possess the power of purification. This death energy of mine will make a perfect synergy with you. Although I cannot offer my power for you to inherit, you can treat this as a gift for you. No need to consider rejecting it, or even try. What I, Elux, decided upon will necessarily take place. Unless you want to leave Long Houchen to kill himself, just gradually absorb all this death force of mine. The surrounding white light gradually vanished, and a peach-sized white, sparkling, translucent bead appeared in front of Elux. In a flash of light, this white pearl quietly flew in front of Kia, the golden skull, eternal melody, floating back in reaction. But in this process, the eternal melody changed gradually, moving rhythmically like a liquid. The eternal melody transformed in the process, to finally turn into the appearance of Long Houchen's portrait, floating in front of Kia. The white death energy integrated with the pearl, and immediately, the golden eternal melody flickered in white. Not only could none of the death energy inside be sensed, but conversely, it was full of a sacred smell. Hanging onto Kia's neck, the new eternal melody stuck close to her chest, and just like before, embedded itself in her chest in a flash of white light. Kia only felt a refreshing power spread from the eternal melody entering her body and melding with her spiritual energy. Without need for her to do anything, her spiritual energy rose slowly. Elux had his death energy stored inside the eternal melody, but didn't directly give it for her to absorb out of fear about its excessive quantity, which Kia would immediately find unbearable. Looking at Kia's stunned expression, Elux had a faint smile on his face. No need to thank me. This is the first gift I am offering you. As for the second gift, it will be given later. Be at ease, since I have offered this gift to you, I will naturally help you two lovers to be together. Otherwise, even the greatest gift wouldn't be enough to please you without him by your side. Hearing his words, Long Houchen and Kia's faces couldn't help but display an expression of joyful surprise. Although Long Houchen really loathed Elux, he really hated to part. Even if all the other reasons were to be thrown aside, just for Kia's sake, he was really unwilling to die like that. Elux's right hand once again pointed to the coffin in front of him, and this time, what came out from there was a bright light of an incomparable purity. When it bubbled up from the coffin, Elux immediately gained an illusory look, as if his soul was sustaining a great attack. Compared to the previous gathered energy of death, the golden radiance that Elux liberated this time became much slower, his face looking a lot more grave than before, so much so that it was a bit strange. Although that golden barrier was there, Long Houchen could clearly feel a light essence of great purity. Was what was coming out the holy power he'd stored in himself for several thousand years? Long Houchen looked at Elux with shock, although he loathed Elux for his previous doings. However, he couldn't help but admire him greatly for his accomplishment in cultivation. Solely by relying on his soul force, he was actually able to draw out power from that body. This showed how great his perception of the power of light was. Asking himself, Long Houchen reached the conclusion that the gap separating himself from Elux was still incomparably wide. Out of all the powerhouses he had ever met, the strongest ones were undoubtedly the demon god Emperor Fengxiu and this holy necromancer Elux. The former may be stronger in total spiritual energy, but in view of the control over light Elux had in his soul form, Long Houchen determined that even Fengxiu was definitely not an opponent for Elux. The light was extracted for a whole hour, before ending gradually. Long Houchen and Kia understood that what Elux was now doing pertained greatly to Long Houchen's resurrection. Only, they did not understand by which method the formerly most powerful necromancer was attempting to recover Long Houchen's lost heart. The coffin was not releasing bright light anymore, and Elux's face became even more focused than before. His left hand was pressed lightly onto his forehead, and then, a light ray with a tail of light came out from the midst of his soul. His movement was slow, and the expression on his face started to twist, as he seemingly suffered a great pain. But both his hands were extremely stable, maintaining the same movement. Gradually, that dot of light was pulled out entirely from his soul. When he was done, his originally very corporeal soul body immediately became transparent, much weaker than before. Elux's hands both started the same movement. From his hands, dots of light gathered into a large ball, and his hands started to trace complicated symbols, each movement appearing very fast. These complicated symbols rapidly joined with the golden mass in front of him that fluctuated constantly in front of these complex symbols, and even trembled. As one symbol after another was completed, Elux's soul body became more and more transparent, and on the last one, he couldn't help but open his mouth wide, breathing while looking down toward the coffin. Immediately, a blackish-grey energy burst out from the coffin, making his soul body regain substance upon contact. Only, that blackish-grey color seemed full of evil and malevolence, incompatible with the golden color right in front. A fantastic scene followed. When Elux held his hands out, facing the lumpy golden object toward Long Houchen, it made sounds similar to heartbeats, and drifted slowly toward Houchen. "This is the heart I have reconstructed for you. Your flesh will be able to regain its functions and assimilate its power. It will become your strongest spiritual cavity in the future, as well as the source of your whole power. I called it Heart of Eternity, and if I may say, that's the greatest masterpiece of my whole life." At this point, Eluxus couldn't help but gasp in self-admiration. Visibly, he was very proud of having made this Heart of Eternity. "I know that you must loathe me, and loathe my power. Although you cannot reject this present of mine since you want to Levato be together with Kia, you feel some reluctance because you believe that your holy heart will inevitably be affected by this present, am I right?" Long Houchen didn't mutter a word, silently approving Elux's declaration. Indeed, for the sake of living, he could accept receiving everything before his eyes, even if it meant going against his holy beliefs without scruples. For Kia's sake, he was willing to renounce all he had, but he knew that really accepting Elux's power, even if it's just the power extracted from his body, would surely impede Long Houchen's future, and greatly affect his future cultivation. Elux declared calmly, "Right, because of these issues, I must make some things clear to you before you receive the Heart of Eternity. You can loathe me and reject my everything, but you cannot reject light. You are the scion of light, to whom the power of light is more fitting than it would be to anyone else. You saw what I just did. I gave Kia the purest death energy I have been condensing over 1,000 years, which is a very small part of my original power. But it prevails in its purity, as it doesn't contain any other superfluous existence, making it only advantageous to Kia and won't leave any brand which is specific to me. I did the same when condensing this Heart of Eternity for you. I extracted all the light essence to turn it into holy power of the purest kind. Do you know what I have stripped and peeled from my very soul? It is my brand as a former scion of light. In other words, I am not giving you my power, but the power of the previous scion of light. You may understand it as receiving holy light and flesh of the purest kind from before the time I have become corrupted. As you have seen, after these two powers were stripped from me, all I have left is the power of death, as well as all the negative energies. These are all classified as corruption, my corruption as well as light's corruption. The guilt is all mine and not light's. Go now, you are the most fitting host for my heart of eternity. While saying that, Elux's eyes flashed in the light as that ball of light suddenly broke into the space in the middle of Houchen's heart. He felt an incomparable surge of heat traveling into all his limbs and causing him to unconsciously sit cross-legged on the ground. His whole body turned golden, and he lost even the capability to think. Placing his ardent gaze onto Long Houchen, Elux stared at him for a whole 10 minutes before gradually loosening his breath. With a little smile on his face, he declared, I am still the holy necromancer, slumbering calamity Elux. No one in this world is more knowledgeable than me regarding death and life. My heart of eternity was a success, and in some sense, the past me before corruption will continue to live inside Long Houchen. Maybe this was the best choice I could do. I will be a little part of all the future contributions he will make for humanity in the future. I hope this will serve as a little redemption for all my previous sins. Kia, you satisfied with how I handled things? Elux shifted his sight toward Kia after making sure that Long Houchen was correctly starting to integrate the heart of eternity. Kia bowed to him. Thank you very much for everything, Senior. She was not the same as Long Houchen, as she didn't have as pronounced of a disposition towards good. She only knew that this was previously a human sinner who just saved her own lover. She only felt filled with gratefulness. Elux smiled at her. Although you cannot inherit my necromancy, in the end you obtain my death energy. I want to leave this world forever and get purified by your hand. This is the best destination I could wish for. Since that time when blame and hatred deceived my sight, I never thought I'd see the day where I'd be so very happy again. I feel like I have come back to the days I was the scion of light, when my life and soul were at their peak. Kia, are you willing to call me teacher? This video will end here.